Picture a statue, a pharaoh, seated on a throne, wearing the traditional false beard of Egyptian kingship, muscles carved into the chest, the body rendered exactly the way every powerful male ruler before her had been rendered for 1,000 years. Now look closer at the face. It's unmistakably a woman's face. And here's the part that should stop you. That wasn't an accident, and it wasn't subtle. It was a deliberate, calculated political decision made by one of the most successful rulers in Egyptian history. A woman who decided the only way to hold on to absolute power was to visually become a man. This is the story of Hatshepsut, and it's not really a story about gender. It's a story about what a society will accept and what it won't, and how far someone brilliant enough will go to work around that limit. Hatshepsut became pharaoh of Egypt around 1478 BCE during the 18th dynasty, one of the most powerful and stable periods in ancient Egyptian history. She wasn't the first woman to hold power in Egypt, but she was something rarer, a woman who ruled not as a queen consort, not as a regent managing power on behalf of a child king, but as a fully legitimate pharaoh in her own right, with a reign that lasted over 20 years and is now considered one of the most prosperous and successful in Egyptian history. Here's how she got there. Hatshepsut was the daughter of Thutmose I and became the principal wife of her half-brother, Thutmose II, a common practice in the Egyptian royal family at the time, intended to keep succession within the bloodline. When Thutmose II died, the throne technically passed to his son, Thutmose III, a child from another wife, far too young to rule. Hatshepsut stepped in as regent, managing the kingdom on the young king's behalf, which was, at this point, a fairly conventional arrangement. But within a few years, something changed. Hatshepsut didn't simply continue as regent until Thutmose III came of age. She had herself formally crowned pharaoh, taking on the full royal titulary, the complete set of formal names and titles reserved exclusively for a reigning king. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a claim to the highest possible political and religious authority in Egyptian society, a position understood at the time to be fundamentally male, tied to the god Horus himself. And this is where the statue comes back into the picture. Egyptian kingship wasn't just a political role, it was a religious one, deeply tied to specific visual and symbolic conventions that had existed for centuries. The pharaoh was depicted with particular regalia, the false beard, the Nemes headdress, a muscular, idealized male physique regardless of the ruler's actual appearance. This imagery wasn't really about accurately depicting what the king looked like. It was about depicting the office itself, an eternal, divinely sanctioned role that existing artistic convention coded as unambiguously male. Hatshepsut's solution to this problem was radical, but also strategically brilliant. Rather than trying to redefine what a female pharaoh could look like, she adopted the existing male visual language of kingship almost entirely. Later in her reign, official statues and reliefs show her with the traditional false beard, a male body, and masculine pronouns used in accompanying inscriptions. Egyptologist Kara Cooney, who has written extensively on Hatshepsut, has argued that this wasn't Hatshepsut attempting to hide her womanhood or pretend to be male in some literal sense. Everyone at court knew exactly who she was. It was, instead, a sophisticated use of established visual and religious symbolism to assert unambiguous legitimacy in a role that iconography had never before needed to accommodate a woman occupying it permanently. In other words, she wasn't disguising herself. She was speaking the only visual language of authority that existed, because inventing a new one risked destabilizing the very legitimacy she was trying to project. This detail alone tells you something important about the world she was operating in. Hatshepsut wasn't limited by a lack of talent, ambition, or political skill. She was operating inside a system of symbolic representation that had simply never been designed to accommodate a woman as supreme ruler. And rather than let that system reject her, she reshaped how she presented herself to fit inside it, while still holding on to every ounce of real power. And her reign wasn't a placeholder or a footnote. It was, by most measures, extraordinarily successful. Hatshepsut oversaw one of the most ambitious building programs in Egyptian history, including her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, an architectural achievement still studied today for its elegant integration with the surrounding cliffs. She re-established long-distance trade networks that had weakened in previous reigns, most famously commissioning a major trading expedition to the land of Punt, a region likely located in modern-day Eritrea or Somalia, which brought back gold, ebony, ivory, myrrh trees, and exotic animals, all extensively documented in relief carvings that still survive. Under her rule, Egypt experienced significant economic prosperity and relative peace, a period historians generally regard as one of consolidation and growth rather than crisis or conflict. This matters because it undermines a lazy assumption people sometimes make, that a female ruler must have been some kind of destabilizing anomaly. Hatshepsut's Egypt wasn't unstable, it was thriving. So what happened to her memory? This is where the story takes a genuinely strange turn. After Hatshepsut's death, and later in the reign of Thutmose III, who eventually did rule as pharaoh in his own right, many of her monuments were defaced. Her cartouches, the oval symbols containing a pharaoh's name, were chiseled out. Statues were destroyed or buried. Her name was removed from official king lists for centuries. For a long time, this was interpreted as an act of pure vengeance, a resentful stepson erasing the memory of the woman who kept him from power for 2 decades. But more recent scholarship complicates that story considerably. Much of the destruction actually occurred later in Thutmose III's reign, not immediately after Hatshepsut's death, which weakens a straightforward revenge narrative. Some Egyptologists, including Cooney, have proposed a different explanation, that the erasure wasn't primarily about personal resentment, but about restoring an unbroken, exclusively male succession narrative for future generations, essentially editing history so that the unusual disruption of a female pharaoh simply didn't appear to have happened at all. Whether the motivation was personal, political, or purely about preserving traditional succession, the effect was the same. For thousands of years, Hatshepsut was largely missing from Egyptian history as most people understood it. It wasn't until the 19th century, when Egyptologists began piecing together fragmented inscriptions and reconstructing damaged monuments, that her reign started coming back into focus, and it took even longer for her full significance to be properly understood. Here's what makes this story worth sitting with. Hatshepsut wasn't erased because she failed. She was erased, at least in part, precisely because she succeeded so completely at something the existing system had no comfortable place for. Her competence wasn't in question. Her legitimacy, within a symbolic and religious framework built entirely around male kingship, was the actual obstacle, and she solved that obstacle not by changing the system, but by finding a way to fully inhabit its existing language while quietly rewriting what it could mean. Think about how often this pattern echoes elsewhere in history. Systems built around a particular default expectation don't always reject someone who doesn't fit that expectation. Sometimes, when that person is skilled enough, the system simply gets reshaped around them just enough to accommodate their presence, without ever fully acknowledging that it happened. Hatshepsut didn't break Egyptian kingship. She proved it could stretch further than anyone had previously required it to. Her temple at Deir el-Bahari still stands. Her trade expedition to Punt is still carved into stone. Her name, once chiseled out of history, is now taught in classrooms and studied in universities around the world. The attempt to erase her didn't fully work, and in a strange way, that failure is its own kind of ending, proof that some things, once they've genuinely happened, resist being unwritten no matter how carefully someone tries. Maybe that's the real story here. Not that Hatshepsut ruled as a king, but that she understood, with total clarity, exactly what her world would and wouldn't accept. And instead of accepting the limit, she found the one door it never thought to lock.